Hey, hello everyone, and good evening, and welcome to yet another study this week of Mighty Women Foundations. This is week 5 actually into the studies, and I can't believe that we've got one more study to go. But yeah, tonight we are here again with another exciting study, and we just want to welcome our viewers at home and thank you for faithfully joining us week in and week out. And as usual, would like to hear from you. So feel free to make your comments in the YouTube comments box. but also we also have an after-hour study that we shall give details later on in the study. So today, as we are looking at a series of Mighty Women Foundations, we are looking at women from the book of Genesis that do form the foundation of our faith. And tonight, we have an extraordinary story that we're looking at, the story of Tamar in the book of Genesis. So just to make sure, this Tamar that we're looking at tonight is not the David Tamar, but the Tamar that you're going to find out from the book of Genesis tonight. So just to put a disclaimer that there's some content that we're going to discuss tonight that may not be suitable for children. So just be on the watch out there as we go along in the study. And tonight I have an amazing panel that's helping us discuss the story that we have. And I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves shortly. I'll start myself. My name is Kudzai. Some people call me Kudzi, but yeah, all is fine. And I live in Middlesbrough, and I'll be facilitating the study tonight.
Hello everyone, my name is Sharla and I live in Scotland.
Hi everyone, my name is Praise. I live in Coventry.
Hi guys, I'm Alicia and I live in London, Southwest.
Okay, that's us today, but I think we also have Ellie who will be joining us as well. I believe she's joining from Malawi. But yeah, before we go into our study, would like us to bow our heads and say a word of prayer, and Shala would lead us into prayer.
Okay, let's pray everyone. Lord, thank you so much for this study. I pray that you lead us as we discuss the topic of Tamar tonight. Lord, please give us fresh bread, give us gems that we ourselves haven't even seen before. And I pray for all those watching that they'll be blessed and that they'll also be very interactive in the chat and that we'll all be learning together. Thank you so much for this opportunity, Lord, to share and learn more of your word. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Amen. All right, thank you, Shala. So I think to start off our study, we just need to lay the foundation of the study, like just to get a feel of the characters, who is in the story, what are they all about. So we'll just have a background information of the study. So if we can have the first slide. To our viewers at home, we're going to be in Genesis chapter 38. So if you want to open your Bibles as well, book of Genesis chapter 38. And that's where we'll be reading from. And tonight we have 3 themes that we've chosen to explore for our study. So the first theme that we will be looking at is widowhood. And we also be looking at another theme, deception. And we will also be looking at the trial. So stay with us. You will understand why we've chosen these 3 themes for the study. So yes, so shall we have the first slide, please, on the screen? And it's from the book of Genesis, chapter 38. I think we'll read verse 1 to 6. Can I ask Shala to read that for us, please?
No problem. And it came to pass at that time that Judah went down from his brethren and turned into a certain Adullamite, whose name was Hira. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua. And he took her and went in unto her. And she conceived and bare a son. And he called his name And she conceived again and bare a son. And she called his name Onan. And she yet again conceived and bare a son and called his name Shelah. And he was at Chezib when she bare him. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, whose name was Tamar.
Okay, thank you, Charlotte. So here we see a few characters being introduced. We see Judah, Judah being Leah and Jacob's fourth son. And we see the story in Genesis chapter 38 comes after Joseph had been sold into Egypt. So Judah then left his family, like he left his brothers, and then he went and dwelt with the Canaanites. So we see another name here, Hira, the Adullamite. So please don't forget this man because he's going to be important as we go along in the story. So Hira, he was an Adullamite, meaning that he lived in a town called Adullam, which was a Canaanite town, and he was quite close to Judah. So from that, Judah married a Canaanite woman, a daughter of Shua, and then his wife gave birth to 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. Yeah, and from that we see Judah then took a wife for his son, his firstborn son, which is and we know that, like in biblical times, like just in the scenario of Abraham, that, you know, parents were able to choose wives for their children. So Judah did the same here. He took a wife for his son. So that's where we see Tamar being introduced in the story. So I want us to go to the next verses. So that's from verse 7. If we can have the next slide. Yes. So we're going to read from verse 7 to 11. If I could ask Alicia to read that for us, please.
So Genesis 38 verses 7 to 11, and it reads, and Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. And Judah said unto Onan, go in unto thy brother's wife, and marry her, and raise up seed to thy brother. And Onan knew that the seed should not be his. And it came to pass, when he went into his brother's wife, that he spilled it on the ground, lest that he should give seed to his brother. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord, wherefore he slew him also. Then since Judah to Tamar his daughter-in-law, remain a widow at thy father's house, so shall my son be grown. For he said, lest peradventure he die also, and his brethren did. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house.
Thank you, Alicia. I think when we read these verses, and that's when you just see, you know, the drama just unfolding. I think there's just a lot of things happening in these few verses that we've read. But I think it's a question that I just wanted to throw to the panel, that, you know, do you think that Judah dwelling amongst the Canaanites had any effect or any impact on how his children turned out to be? Because we read that was a wicked man. So do you think that, you know, Judah's interactions or associations with the Canaanites had any influence on that? Yeah, Shala, go on.
Yeah, I think it's naive to think that where you live isn't going to have an impact on your character. The Bible shows us this with, remember when Ashley and the group did Lot's wife, you know, we could see the direct impact of them living in Sodom and Gomorrah. Also, we see this again with the Israelites coming out of Egypt. They were still yearning for the leeks and the onions. And when Moses was up in the hills for a while, they were like, do you know what? Can we make a gold calf and worship? And do you see what I'm saying? So it's naive when the Bible even shows us, and human nature hasn't changed really, only technology has. 100%, I do think it had an impact. I think at the same time, what is in your heart is going to come out as well. So, you know, in spite of, because Jesus shows us that no matter where you live, you can still hold to your morals, but at the same time, it's naive to totally think, well, I'm just so not affected. It's going to have some type of impact. If you're not like sinking into the word every day, sinking into the Holy Spirit, you're going to be affected 100%.
Thanks, Shala. I think that's it's a very important point that you've brought up there. And I think also, God had forbidden the Israelites to marry, the Canaanites. And that was because, they had different beliefs altogether. They had their own gods, their own practices, traditions. So God had forbidden them to intermarry. But we see that, that's what, Judah went and done in this case. So yeah, I think I'm tempted to believe that, this had, to a certain extent, the Bible is not clear, but a certain extent to how, Judah's family turned out to be. Yes, Ellie, go on.
Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't say I disagree. But I'm also thinking about the impact of the people who are raising the children on the lives of the children, right? So there is the environment, the point that's been made. If you look at Judah's life up until this point, I mean, this chapter is just after the brothers sell Joseph into slavery. So it's almost as if he gets away from his family because of all of these things that have happened and he wants to start a new life. That's how I read it anyway. So he gets there and he gets a wife. He's trying to integrate into the community, if you like, and make a life. But the choice that he makes, like you were saying, Kudzi, he marries from the tribe, one of the tribes that God says not to marry from. And he himself is not necessarily in a very good spiritual place. So you see his spiritual life improve over time. By the time we get to Joseph in Egypt and all of that, he's now offering himself instead of Benjamin. You can see a character transformation after a long time. But so apart from that environment, we also need to bear in mind that as parents or as people who are looking after children, bringing them up, our character has an impact on them as well.
Yeah, I think that's powerful. We can't blame it all on planet Earth, isn't it? Okay. Praise God then.
I wanted to also say something similar to what Ellie just said. I think in addition to the environment, I think there's a statement that an apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. And I think it's very true that whatever the parents, their beliefs and their morals, they in somehow the children are most likely going to take after that. And we are not told a lot about his spiritual life, Judah, but I think from his choices we can sort of like deduct what sort of spiritual life he had, and the wife too. But at the same time, I think from the sons we can deduct that it wasn't such a godly household, in at least from this children's behavior. And I think it probably came from the fact that the parents were not that strong, with the relationship with God. I think there's a verse in Ezekiel, I can't remember, I'll probably put it in the chat. And it talks about how, what the mother or her character is, so is going to be her child. And because the child is always with the mother, and I would believe that the child is most likely going to carry whatever the parent or the mother is teaching her, which is why I think most of the times we're told that to instill, a lot of these lessons when the children are still children, because in that they can carry forward those lessons to their adulthood.
Yes, I think that's a powerful point that you raised there, Praise, about, the mother having, more influence on how the child turns out to be. And so I think we're going to move on to, verse 7 that we read, that was a wicked man and God slew him. So this is where we see Tamar becoming a widow. She's losing a husband because God kills him. and because of his wickedness. So I just wanted us to discuss, that this was a situation that Tamar did not choose. She was a victim of this, this situation. So she became a victim of her husband's wicked behavior. So I wanted to ask ladies a question that, when you are on the receiving end of a life-changing, like negative experience due to someone else's poor choices, what do you do? Like, Tamar was on the end of, receiving, she received, like out of a choice that her husband had made, like was wicked, he chose whatever his ways, and she was on the receiving end. So I wanted us ladies to explore that point, like, what do you do when you find yourself at the end of a negative experience that is not, due to yourself, like, because of somebody else's choices? I don't know what you guys think about that.
I think it depends on what it is. Yeah. So there's some circumstances where I'm reflecting that a lot of the problems that people find themselves in, they haven't caused. I mean, I had to take it about my life maybe, but generally, especially now as wickedness grows in the world, we are experiencing more and more problems caused by other people. So if you're in a situation where you can do something about it, sometimes it might be at work and you've got policies in place and you've got the law and all of that, you may be suffering because of somebody's actions, but the things that you may be able to do about it in order to make the situation better. But for Tamar's situation, based on women back in the day and the husband, and we don't even, I mean, I was curious. I kind of wanted to know what his wickedness was, but the Bible doesn't say. Whatever it was really bad, right? And she had no other source of income and all of that. That would have been very difficult. So my answer is just that there are times that I have been on the receiving end of other people's bad decisions and I've just had to bear it and just pray, because there's nothing I can do about it. They've made the decision, maybe I'm very disadvantaged or things are irreversible. So I pray and wait and trust in God. But where that has happened and I'm able to do something about it, I try and see if I can rectify the situation.
So Ellie, you're just saying that we just bear it, right? Okay, cool. Alicia.
Yeah, so Tamar's husband has died because he was wicked, and yeah, she didn't have anything to do with that. But I'm just thinking, we serve a God that is fair and just. And actually, throughout the Bible, there's various different guidance and rules, if you like, to do with, what happens in certain situations. And so this situation is kind of catered for. And I'm just going to read it. It's from Deuteronomy. Excuse me. It's gone somewhere. So it's Deuteronomy 25, verse 5. If brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside the family. Her husband's brother shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to her. Right? So I know we haven't got there yet, but what happens next is that the father gives his brother to her to essentially kind of create, supposedly create a son or for his brother, essentially, who passed away. And so that that plan kind of started, but it didn't go to plan because of what happens next. But yeah, so in that case where, you've been wronged, I think Ellie kind of touched upon it. Sometimes we can do things about it in terms of like in the framework of the law. And so, yeah, sometimes if we've been wronged, we don't just have to be a bystander and do nothing about it. Actually, we should educate ourselves in terms of like what we can do to help ourselves in situations, and not just have this faith in inverted commas that things are going to work out. Yes, we should be faithful, and know and be confident that God has a plan, but sometimes, yeah, we should make positive actions as well within that framework.
Yes, I like that. Thank you. Shala?
Yeah, so the question was like, what if we're on the receiving end of someone else's bad decisions?
Yes.
So the first thing I thought is that if we suffer because of someone else's bad decisions, the first thing you're going to feel is resentful, because you're going to feel like, I'm going through this because you were dumb, because you were selfish or greedy, or because you were just plain foolish, right? I think you have to be honest with yourself and deal with the resentment that you're feeling. Do you see what I'm saying? You have to actually go through those emotions. And then my second thought was, once we go through that, we have to show people grace, because I was thinking, I'm a parent, and there's going to be decisions that I've made or that I make that are going to impact the girls in a negative way. If I'm not led by the Spirit, if me and King aren't led by the Spirit, our dumb decisions will affect the girls. We can see where certain decisions have affected them. Do you see what I'm saying? So I would say we have to give those people grace and recognize that they're just human beings, and human beings fail one another. And sometimes we're just led by the flesh and we make bad decisions.
Powerful. Praise.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, you know, what Shala just said about like parents' choices, how they do have an effect on the children. And I was just thinking that, you know, for example, Joseph in the Bible, he was somewhat a victim of his father's choice that he had made to be his favorite child. I guess in that sense, it was in some way positive, you might want to say, but he had not chosen to be his father's favorite child, I should say. But then he realized that because of that, his brothers actually sold him and, you know, hated him, even though he had not even done anything. And I was just thinking that, do you think that because he had not done anything about it, he would come and be like, oh, but it's not my fault, or, you know, why are you hating on me? You should be asking our dad. He did not do any of that. And I think that it's just going back to what Shala and Eleanor just said, that you'd have to bear it and just pray that God will deal with whatever, you know, the anger or resentment that is probably coming out from the other people that are not enjoying that part of the story.
Yeah, I think that's very important, that, you know, anger and bitterness is always going to be part of the story, and, you know, we need to have forgiving hearts and being able to let go. And I'm just reminded, you know, that story of Abigail in the Bible. You know, Abigail, the Bible clearly says that she was married to a fool, you know, her husband. And, you know, whatever she did, you know, with David, it ended up creating a different situation for Abigail altogether. She became a widow out of that situation. And, you know, she had to deal with it. But we also see, you know, the hand of God in all that story, and in every other situation, really, we see the hand of God, that, you know, He's always helping and always ready to help those who are, you know, victim of circumstances. Ellie, and then we'll go to YouTube.
I just wanted to on what when we talk about bearing it, that it's not whimpering and feeling helpless, maybe that's the way to put it, but it is in the knowledge that God knows, that even though I'm not able to do anything about it, like as we're going to see with this story as we carry on, that God wasn't indifferent to Tamar's plight. So when we accept that this is difficult, or maybe I can't do anything about it, we're not just sitting there and waiting for things to go badly, but we are waiting in hope and faith. We're praying, we're trusting that God is fair. Like Alicia was saying, God is just, God is powerful. he is going to do something about it. He has seen how I've been treated, and it's going to be okay. And I can give you testimonies upon testimonies of this in my life when things have happened and I'm like, oh, someone just did something here, and I know that they did. Sometimes I can't prove it, but I know that they did. And if you give it time, you know, sometimes it takes years, but if you give it time, things have a way of sorting themselves out because God is working even when you can't do anything about it.
Powerful. Thank you, Ellie. Alicia?
Yeah, definitely. And just to, throw in another verse in there. So Romans 12:19, it says, "Beloved, do not avenge yourselves, but rather give place to wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord." And so when we may have been wronged by other people, who are we like to know what is just and what the consequence should potentially be? We don't have privy to all of the circumstances. We don't know the motivations behind other people's behavior, or like what impact something has had upon them that has caused them to act in a certain way. Vengeance is definitely God's and not within our own hands. But we do have a YouTube comment as well from Ashley, and he says, in relation to the question that we're asking, how would we react when we've been wronged? He said that one example of people suffering as a result of other people's bad decisions is Moses, Aaron, Caleb, and Joshua having to wander around the wilderness for an extra 40 years because of others' rebellion. And he finds it amazing how they were willing to accept that and have patience instead of complaining about the unfairness of their situation. Yeah, I mean, that trip to the promised land should have taken, I think it's under 2 weeks, maybe 11 days or something like that. But it took 40 years. I mean, that's the next type of patience, right? To be exercising over other people. And these people were complaining as well. So yeah.
Yeah, and that was another 40 years for Moses, who had already been in the wilderness for 40 years. So he'd already done his 40, right? But the people needed that as well. So yeah, double trouble.
Yeah, true. No, that's true. Thanks, Ashley, for that comment. I think what I want us to discuss as well is this issue of widowhood. Maybe, on this panel, we might not have a direct experience that any of us had been widowed or anything, but I think it's something that is important that, we have widows around the world. I was looking at the statistics. It says that there are at least 258 million widows in the world, and also due to COVID the numbers would have gone up a little bit. So and the story that we are exploring, Tamar became a widow twice. She lost due to his wickedness, and also lost Onan due to his wickedness as well. So I want us guys to just explore that. Like, how does life change when somebody becomes a widow? What are some of the life changes or the experiences or, the challenges that widows face, maybe in the society today, or maybe in relation to the study that we're looking at? Okay, Alicia?
Yeah, so if I just share, you mentioned COVID, and, the widow rate would have gone up. And yeah, so that is my experience. So my dad passed away with COVID like March 2 years ago now. And so my mum's a widow, right? And I suppose she has her close family, so me and my sister and my brother and her grandchildren. But they were together for over 30, how old am I now? Over 30, 35 years. And that's a long time. That's a huge chunk of your life that you have been in a relationship with somebody, a marriage, you shared so much together, the ups and downs, etc. And there's the loneliness, the lack of companionship, companionship that you no longer have. so yeah, it's a difficult time to navigate. Yeah. And there's days where you're okay and you're getting on with things, but I'm sure, birthdays, special occasions, those memories of, or even the thoughts of, what if you were still here, right? And I suppose it's going to be different for every relationship. I'm not sure if Tamar was in a loving relationship or not. I don't know. Yeah, but we can't say. But yeah, so widowedness in terms of like, yeah, the emotional side of it. Financially, I think you kind of mentioned, so my mom didn't really work. She was like a housewife, and obviously when my dad passed away, there wasn't that income, but we're getting by and still living. But yeah, there could be a financial impact as well, and especially back in the day, thousands of years ago, Tamar, she wouldn't have had an income, and she wouldn't have had, I'm guessing she would have left her family in a different place, in a different land, and so yeah, so isolation, I would say, would be an issue.
Yeah, that's very true. Thank you for sharing your personal story, Alicia. Praise.
Yeah, I was also going to say, in relation to Tamar's story, some other issues that widows tend to face is, Tamar didn't have any children when her husband, or the first and the second one, died, and so I would have thought that the society probably would have to be putting pressure on her that, she did not give any children to this family. Or could it be that it's actually her own fault? She couldn't have any children because how now she's got two husbands that have passed and she doesn't have children. So I think maybe some of the issues are because it's not just you, the husband is dead. So even whatever you say, I would think that maybe people won't take it because she's trying to defend herself. So I think there's the pressure from society, there's probably pressure from, the in-laws side, because she hasn't really brought the children that I would think that years ago they would have wanted, sons to keep the name going. But yeah, I think probably society pressure from the society would be a huge one for the widows.
Powerful, that's true. I think that there's a lot of stigma around, widows, especially in the church. Like, if a widow is just speaking to a married man, people don't know how to interpret that. They think that maybe, she's now wanting to, to associate herself with another person's husband. And, it's like they are misinterpreted. Anything that they do is, is misinterpreted, It's like also, the society also doesn't know how to help widows. Like, they don't really understand. We don't really understand the struggles that we have mentioned here, like, the financial struggles, like what they go through emotionally. We are not really equipped to help. So I think it's a different difficult time of life, for widows, and we see this in the story of Tamar as well. So I want us to move on to the next verse. I think it's quite an interesting verse here that I'll read. It's verse 9. It says, "And Onan knew that the seed should not be his, and it came to pass when he went in unto his brother's wife that he spilled it on the ground, lest he should give seed to his brother." Okay, when I read this, I was just like, Onan, really? Like, what are you doing? So I just want us, to discuss that part, just that verse. What do you guys think about, Onan's actions here? Shala.
No, I'm just laughing because I'm remembering some of our conversations in the midweek study surrounding this verse. But what I realized upon reading the chapter again, right, is, and the Bible has a way of emphasizing things. So it says, and Onan knew that the seed should not be his. And then the verse ends with, lest that he should give seed to his brother. So you could tell, for whatever reason, he was really resenting the fact that this child, that he's going to have to do this act and the child would not be his. So maybe he didn't have a good relationship with his brother. Do you see what I'm saying? That's one thing. And also, this was part of the duty, as Alicia read earlier. So it was part of his duty to be a brother, to, sleep with her, and then for her to get pregnant. So the fact that he spilled the seed on the ground, it shows that he was well and being disobedient. And it wasn't honorable, because he had sex with her knowing that he wasn't going to go all the way. So he was totally in the wrong for that. He basically used Tamar, if you know what I mean. He used her, so it wasn't good.
That's very true, that. Alicia?
Exactly what Charlotte was saying, in terms of, like, he took advantage of that situation for his own pleasure, literally. And, that's why that displeased God. And essentially, it was all about him. It wasn't about, honoring his brother. It wasn't about being obedient to his father. And he would have known, that was the law, like, set out in Deuteronomy. Like, that is what happens if your brother dies. And his wife is widowed. This is what is going to happen. You're going to be called to marry her, essentially, continue his brother's lineage. He just took advantage of the situation, which was wrong.
Very wrong, very much so. Ellie?
I was trying to keep calm because of the conversation in the midweek study about this. So I'm not going to say what I said in the midweek study. You'll be glad to know. But I was wondering, like what Alicia was saying. I thought, why would he do this? It just bothered me. So I looked it up. And in relation to the laws of inheritance for the Hebrews, the firstborn son was given a double portion of the father's inheritance. And the reason was that, firstly, one portion was his, the other portion was for him to look after any women in the family, but also if the mother was widowed, he could look after his mother. Now, because had died, it meant that the inheritance would have been split between Onan and Sheila, right? The younger brother. But if Tamar had a child by Onan, the first child would be Er's child, the first brother's child. That's how it was. So he would inherit what was due to Er. Therefore, that child would get the double portion, and then Onan and Sheila would get the rest. That made sense, because I kept saying, why didn't he just get another woman? Because he could have refused. Part of the rules as well were that he could have refused to marry Tamar. He didn't have to. It was dishonorable, but he could have refused and gotten over it. There was a process for doing it. So I believe that was a big contributor to why he said, he did what he did. Because at the end of the day, if you look at this from Tamar's perspective, the only way she can get pregnant and get this security is if Onan makes her pregnant. So I don't know how many times he spilled it on the ground, as the Bible says, but you can imagine being in her situation, knowing that this is the only way that I can be looked after. And this man carries on like this every time. I don't know if it was one time, I don't know how many times they were. And I think that was it must have been difficult for her, but also made her grief and her emotional situation worse. Because the one person who could change her situation was being deceptive. And I believe that's why God allowed him to die, why God slew him, because his deception was on many different levels, but also he was trying to trick God, I think, anyway.
I think that's a really powerful, point that you make there, Ellie. Just imagine being hurt by someone who should be protecting you. So Onan was supposed to really protect Tamar, and the fact that, the nurture of the thing that he was doing, I think it made it difficult for Tamar to say it, in public, that this is what is going on here, it's kind of like, it's a shameful thing for her to say. So I can't imagine the pain that, she went through, and, that she couldn't even tell anyone, and, that Onan was supposed to protect her, but, he failed, he did the reverse. Shala.
Thank you for that point that you two both just raised, because I didn't really consider if he did this more than once or whatever that may be. So I guess you can see, how I mentioned resentment earlier. To me, it kind of gives way to what she did when we go into it. Do you see what I'm saying? Maybe it could have been birthed here, I don't know, but it's a valid reason to feel hard done by when you know that, like, this person is literally just using you, like they're not doing what they need to do. So you can have like empathy for Tamar there, where, and as you said, it's so sensitive. Who is going to walk around and tell their relatives or friends that you feel like you're not? And back then, having a child was such a big deal. So it's like, wow, he doesn't even think I'm worthy of having a child. It's deep. It's deep.
It is indeed deep. We'll take praise and then go to Elisha.
I was going to read Exodus chapter 22, verse 22. It says, "Ye shall not afflict any widow or fatherless child. If thou afflict them in any wise, and they cry at all unto me, I will surely hear their cry, and my wrath shall wax hot, and I will kill you with the sword, and your wives shall be widows, and your children fatherless." And I was just thinking that the way Ellie just explained it, it just makes more sense why God had to kill him, because it was just too hurtful in so many ways. That why did you accept the duty if you're not going to fulfill it? I think it would have been so much better, like everybody has said, he should have just said no. He should have just said no. And then I believe it's in Psalm 68 where it says, God, he's the, the father. Yes, he's like the father of the child.
The fatherless, yeah.
Yes, and the widows. It just means that the widows are at his heart, and whoever tempers with them, God will deal with them as well.
That's true. Thanks, praise. Elisha?
Yeah, so if you think about this in terms of people looking into the situation, not knowing what's going on underneath, Tamar's first husband has died. They don't know the reason why, but we're told that, if God made it so. And then her second husband dies, and she is childless, but other people don't know what he's been doing behind closed doors. And so when it comes to the third husband and the youngest son of Judah, there's a bit of like, what's that word? It's like not a stigma, but as in like a preconception of what's going to happen next. Oh, is my first son going to die, etc. So yeah, I feel really sorry for her because she's not done anything. It's just circumstances that she's kind of under. But there are some comments as well that I want to read out. So just a nice guy says, "Do you think it is a good thing that mothers and fathers get involved in choosing spouses today instead of leaving them to wander aimlessly alone, looking for a partner? Too many lonely females in church." Okay. In the circumstance of Tamar, it didn't really work out for her, right? That she, I don't know, was this an arranged marriage here? It wasn't. Judah just chose her for her. I don't know, it doesn't say whether it was arranged or not, but just say it was arranged, and then, you know, what happened. And as someone mentioned before, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And so if you're marrying into this family who don't really have great morals, then you're kind of stuck in this situation, right? So yeah, it really depends who the parents are and how they choose, whether it works out or not. That's in my opinion anyway. And then one more from Amari Norman. He says that he did not love Tamar, and this is the second husband. This incident would surely be indicative of an abusive dynamic in their relationship. Emotional abuse at the very least. What do we think about that? Thank you for your comments, guys.
I think I'll have Sharla, and then we'll address some of the points that have been raised there. Sharla?
Yeah, I was just going to say two things. First, thank you for that point, Praise, because it reminded me, and you mentioned it, of James chapter 1, verse 27. Pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction, and to keep himself unspotted from the world. So again, what you said, like, God really cares. So if you hurt a widow and the orphan, you're literally going against what is true religion. Because a lot of time we think true religion is, oh, I came to church this Sabbath. Do you see what I'm saying? But it's really in how you treat people behind closed doors when no one's looking, character. But with regards to, like, should parents be involved, I agree with what Alicia's saying. I think yes, if your parents are lovely Christian people, then they should have a say in who you marry, because at the end of the day, I think how society is now, we're like, sometimes people are dating someone for months, even years, and then they're like, I'm engaged, you know, they just kind of show up. Do you see what I'm saying? But like, at least if different people are involved, they can give you their feedback on what they think on the person. So whether or not you heed to the advice of your parents, I just think if they love the Lord and they're being led by the Spirit and they're fair, you know, you should involve them in that process and listen to what they have to say. It may not necessarily be arranged. I know for some cultures it is arranged, and most of the time it does seem like it works out. With the crazy thing is, sometimes arranged marriages work more than marriages in the West, because I think they recognize more that at the core of marriage is duty, past feelings and love, which, you know, feelings flop and change like the weather. Like, it's duty, and from the duty love grows. But then when we only base it on love, then when they stop making you happy, it's like, oh, it's over. So I just think that we have to get as many people as possible involved, you know?
That's true. Thanks for that point, Sharla. Ellie, I think after Ellie, then maybe we'll have to move on. Yeah?
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to say something to one of the comments about emotional abuse. But before I do that, I was thinking about the inheritance law and the younger brother marrying the deceased brother's wife also meant that the younger brother would not be able to choose a wife for himself. So the point that Sharla is making is very important, because it was going to have to be purely based on principle that Onan was going to marry Tamar and be content, right? Because it wasn't just that he was supposed to sleep with her, he was supposed to marry her. The first child would count as Er's child, but that was supposed to be his wife. And it takes a certain kind of person to forfeit that for themselves. And when we look at how his brother died and the fact that he was wicked in where they lived, he clearly wasn't an honorable man on himself. And today, even today, if that was happening in our culture, not many people would be happy with that arrangement, right? It's like, I want to choose my own wife. What do you mean? I should marry my brother's wife and that's it. So just some reflection on that. But I wanted to address the emotional abuse point, because this happens in marriages, right? Where one spouse wants a child, the other doesn't, or they're trying to create space between the children, or they want to wait, or all of that. And there are different ways in which people control this. Women are also known for things like this, because women know when they can get pregnant and how they should get pregnant. So it's not only for the men, but because this is Mighty Women, so we're going to talk about Tamar. I just wanted to make that observation that it does happen, and it is serious emotional abuse, because the only person who is able to give you a child is the one who doesn't want to. And I know that when we're discussing this in the midweek study, we talked about contraception, and then we decided not to go there. I don't know if Charlotte wants to go there, but we said we wouldn't go there. It's all in there, and this is happening in Christian marriages. I know, can I say this? Maybe no, maybe I can't, because it's a live study, right? But you hear of people like men getting vasectomies and their wives not knowing. That's what's happened, and the wife is trying to get pregnant, the man is saying nothing, and just being normal. So we just need to be mindful as children of God, and like I said, women as well, that there's certain things in relationships that we have more control over than other people, but it is not fair, it is cruel, and it is abusive if we're not in agreement in what we're doing.
Yes, I think that's a really, really powerful point here that you make. And I think in the case of Onan, he just wanted sexual gratification, but he did not want the responsibility, that comes with it. And I think we are not any different when it comes to, our spiritual lives ourselves, that, we want, all the pleasures that God, has afforded us, but we do not want, to do it within the parameters that the scriptures, have declared. So we don't want to do it in a way that honors God, but we do it according to, to the flesh. And we are not different from, Onan. Onan wanted just to, to satisfy himself sexually, but he did not want to have the responsibility that would come after, after he had, given Tamar children. Shala, and then we will move on to our next point.
Yeah, thank you. Powerful point, Ellie. I was just going to say to what you said, like, that's really deep to hear that people are having vasectomies and not saying anything. That is such deception. And what I would say to those who are not married, have a serious discussion about expectations and what you want. Like, sometimes people change. Someone might get married saying that they want children, or whatever that may be. But I would seriously say, if you're not married and you're considering it, really know, does the person want children? Do they not? So that you don't end up into problems. Like I said, I didn't want to have children, but the reality is, unless you're actively using contraception, you're open to it. So I would say I was still open to it, that reality. Do you see what I'm saying? But for somebody else, I think it is a personal choice in marriage how the couple goes about contraception. But to speak to what Kudzi said as well, to step on people's toes, a part of what contraception is having the fun and not have to have the responsibility. Let's just keep it real. That's a main part of contraception, so that you can have all the sex that you want and not have to worry about babies and potentially STDs. So we do have to consider those things as well. Who is contraception really for? Is it for the married couple, or is it for people who just want to kind of do their thing? But again, even if a couple does want to go about using contraception, then for me, that's their personal choice, just to kind of bring it all around.
Powerful. I think, goes down to personal choices there, Shala. Thanks. Alicia?
Yeah, so before we move on, I wanted to close off with the YouTube comments. There's a comment that says, the ironic thing about Tamar is that she later pretends to be a prostitute, but the way that Onan treats her, essentially using her for sexual gratification without fulfilling the commitment, is as if she is one. And perhaps that is one of the reasons why she goes down that route, because she may have become just numb in terms of like how she was treated. And so when she does prostitute, perhaps, from her past experience, has kind of molded her into what her behavior is kind of reflected. Jodie also wrote, as women, we can feel strong emotions towards having children, perhaps more so in ancient time. I wonder how this would have impacted how she felt in addition to the abusive nature of his actions. Then Customer Fry wrote, a fantastic point, Charla, regarding the benefit of parents getting involved. The West seems lost when it comes to forming secure relationships. Even the church is wrong.
Powerful. Now we love all those comments. I just hope that we could have more discussion in the after hours about that point. But I just want us to move on in the study so we can cover as much as we can. I want us to move to that point when Judah now sends Tamar to her parents' home. So after the loss of her two husbands, these are Judah's sons. Judah then decides to say, no, you know what? You can't stay here anymore. Go and stay with your parents. So he sent her back. But Judah, in his heart, he thought that Tamar was responsible for the death of, and Onan. So I wanted us to discuss this point on blame. That Tamar was blamed on the death of both her husbands. So how do we handle blame, especially for the things that we haven't done ourselves? I don't know what you guys think about that. Right. I'll take praise and then Elisha.
Yeah, I think the reality is when you get blamed for something that you have not done, the natural reaction is to want to defend yourself. And in most situations, because somebody's blaming you for whatever you have not done, they are very sure of the idea in their head, but you obviously know that it wasn't your fault, because with Tamar, the chances are with Tamar is she probably knew, especially for the first husband, that actually for two of the husbands, that this evil has been happening. Because I would think that if you have a husband, you know the ins and out of whether their spiritual life or their secret sins, I would think that you probably know some of them. And so she knows that this was pure God's judgment. It was literally on God. And some people are probably blaming her. But I would think that today, if people were to blame me for something that I have not done, I think the Bible is very clear that we don't need to prove ourselves to people. I think that is supposed to be God's work to prove ourselves to everybody. I don't know if that makes sense. So we don't justify ourselves. I think that you can do as much as you can, but I think in Tamar's situation, she really didn't have any choices, and she just had to leave it to God.
Definitely. Thanks, Praise. Alicia?
Yes, your question is quite similar to how would we react to situations where someone else has done us wrong. So this is kind of like an extension of that. And so when things happen and we are blamed for something that we haven't done, we just have to suck it up. Although it's hard, but we have to be confident that what is done in the dark will be brought to light, and that God knows our heart, God knows the circumstances, and at the end of the day, He is the one that distributes mercy, distributes grace. He's just, and so we just have to, as Christians, be as Christ-like as we can, and we all know that Christ was without blemish. He took on the sin of the world, and so he was without blame, and He died for each and every one of us for our salvation, and so Thank God for Jesus.
Yeah, it's true. I think just following from that point, Christ even said that, forgive them, Father, for they do not know what they are doing. And I think in this case with Tamar, there was a lot of shame also that came with her going back, to her father's house. You've been this married woman, and now you go back and you are wearing, these garments of widowhood. You don't have a husband. It must have been difficult for her to exist in that society. I want us to move on. I think we are behind time. I want us to move on and cover a few things. So I want us to move on to verse 12. To verse 12 of Genesis 38. Now it says that, okay, we'll have it on the screen. I will read it. So we will read 12 to 14. It says, now in the process of time, the daughter of Shaw, Judah's wife, died, and Judah was comforted and went up unto his sheep shearers to Timnath, he and his friend Hira the Adullamite. And it was told Tamar, saying, behold, thy father-in-law goeth up to Timnath to shear his sheep. And she put her widow's garments off from her, and covered her with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat in an open place, which is by the way to Timnath, for she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given unto him to wife. Well, the story just keeps getting more and more interesting there. And I don't know if you guys remember, Timnath is a very familiar place. I think it's a familiar road. Other person who went to Timnath was Samson. Samson, when he went to find a wife amongst the Philistines, he also went down that road, Timnath. And we see the same thing here, that Judah made his way to Timnath, and he went again and associated with Hira, the Adullamite that we mentioned from the beginning of the study. He went and associated himself with him. So, by the way, can you guys hear me? Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Okay, sorry. So I wanted us to explore this point that, Tamar had to wait, for some time, to wait for Judah to give her Shelah, and she did not know how long she was going to wait at this point. So she had to wait. I believe it was for a long time that she had to wait. So I wanted us to explore this point, that how do we have patience when life is not fair, or when you wait and hope for something to happen, not knowing when it's going to happen, and also when the plan of the thing happening is dependent on somebody else. So in this case, Judah held all the keys in this case. So I just want us to explore that point. Alicia, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, that was a bold hand, but what would we do if something has been promised to you and everything is telling you that it's not going to happen? Well, Tamar, we took things into our own hands to make it happen.
Yeah.
But I'm just thinking, would I do the same thing? It depends what it is. I'm thinking. it's difficult because, you know, on one hand, we're called to wait and be faithful that God is going to move in a situation.
Mm-hmm.
But then we're also told, you know, faith without works is dead.
Mm.
So how far do we go in our works to bring about situations that, not that we're helping God along, but essentially, yeah, that it's difficult to strike a balance, and like to think, actually, is this what really is the will for God for me? And that's why I think it's so important to have prayer and communication with God, and not just communication, but to be still, because sometimes like he might be talking and we're not hearing what he's saying. So yeah, that's not really an answer, more an exploration.
Yeah. Shala?
When you first said this, I thought of like, I remember years ago, somebody that I know telling me that she's significantly older than me. So at the time, she would have been probably 30s, and her friends would have been in their 30s. And she was saying that, like, or mid 30s or whatever. And she was saying that some of her friends, they really wanted to have a child. So what some of them had done was just sleep with someone to have a child, you know. And on one hand, I understand, because the desire to have children is strong for a lot of women, you know what I mean? But on the other hand, I thought, ooh, it's a bit unfair for the child, because you're actively going about it in a way where the husband's, or the man's not going to be around. And most people want a mother and father around when they're growing up. So I think in situations like that, it's always difficult, isn't it? Because ultimately, if you run out of patience, you may end up doing something disobedient. But then I can still empathize with the wait, because even hearing about, as we were talking about this with the 40 years, I was thinking, cool, could I have done that with those disobedient people, knowing that, like, I should have been in the, in the land a long time, and it's taken me 40 years. I don't know if I would have had that patience. Sometimes you haven't even got patience for the loved one that you live with. You see what I'm saying? So it's like, to think situations like that, I find it really hard. So my heart does go out to those ladies that I thought of. But then, as I said, we're struggling, but you have to think, oh, if I take this into my own hands, what are the consequences going to be? Because that's the real stinger. You see what I'm saying? Like, yes, I want a baby, but then when I'm struggling and then there's no man around and the child's asking me, who's my daddy? Where's daddy? It's that pain afterwards. So I think maybe that's something that we have to do if we feel like we're running out of patience. If I take this into my own hands, is the pain afterwards going to be worse than what I'm feeling now?
Yes. I think that's a powerful point there, Shala. Thanks for sharing. Praise.
I was just thinking that when Shala was talking, I was just thinking that, I was just thinking about a lot of women who, very, like, how can I say, some may say traditional, and in a sense that they wait for the man to come and approach them, and they have to follow this sort of set, I don't know, traditional, procedure. And because your question was, what do you do if the man, like, the process is really not in your hands, but you need this to happen, which is for a lot of women that have to wait for this man to come and propose and ask them to marry them, and all of this. You can't really go and be like, okay, here, propose now. Okay, here, you need to, it defeats the purpose. And I was just thinking, what the reality is that we are put in situations where you are not wanting to be in because of pressure from the society, or even family members, or even friends, because maybe people have different beliefs and they have different sort of things that they want, you know, in future. And so you're not forced to sort of follow this path that you probably had not chosen. But I think just going back to Charlotte's point is we've got to learn patience. And maybe in the story of Tamar that we're looking at, patience, she probably did practice patience for the longest of time. And until she realized, I'm going to take matters into my own hands, and, you know, did what she had to do. I think patience is really the greatest thing that we should be learning at this point.
Thanks for that point. I think something that came into my mind is that, you know, I think Tamar was hurt for a very long time, you know, she was really hurt for a very long time, that, you know, because of her pain, I think she failed to process her pain very well. And, you know, she did something outside of, you know, her own character, because she'd failed to really, you know, deal with the pain that she was in. Alicia, you had something to say?
Trying to unmute. There's something that was said, I think, praise, in terms of it's difficult to get that balance between waiting and taking action. And so I was just thinking of the story of Ruth and Naomi, in particular, versus in Ruth 3. And this is Ruth telling Naomi what to do. She says, wash and put on perfume and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him, Boaz, know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. And so she's kind of like orchestrating these events that take place for essentially this relationship to start to blossom and to kind of kickstart. And so if Ruth didn't, you know, initiate this circumstance or environment, who knows what would have happened. But essentially it's just a thought, you know, do we sit and do nothing? So as women, if we're trying to get into a relationship, you're not going to get into a relationship with somebody if you're just sitting in your house doing nothing, right? I mean, you maybe could go on like some dating apps or whatever, I don't know. But essentially we have to put ourselves out there in a certain way, obviously, you know, not in a ungodly way, whatever that looks like. But you see what I'm saying. Yes.
Yes, thanks for that point, Alicia. I'm tempted to move on to, you know, the last theme that we have, which is the trial. I think it's just in the constraints of time. So if we just have the next few verses on the screen, please. I would ask if Shala could read that, and that's from Genesis 38, 20 and 21, 20 to 21, yeah.
And Judah sent the kid by the hand of his friend the Adulamite to receive his pledge from the woman's hand, but he found her not. Then he asked the men of that place, saying, where is the harlot that was openly by the wayside? And they said, there was no harlot in this place.
Okay, I think in between we have to fill in some of the verses. I think can we have the verses just before this as well? Yeah. All right, thank you. I'll read them. It says that when Judah saw her, he thought she was an harlot because she had covered her face. Then he turned to her by the way and said, please let me come in to you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. So she said, what will you give me that you may come in to me?" And she said, "I'll send a young goat from the flock." So she said, "Will you give me a pledge till you send it?" Then he said, "What pledge shall I give you?" So she said, "Your signet and cord and your staff that is in your hand." Then he gave them to her and went in unto her, and she conceived by him. So she arose and went away and laid aside her veil and put on the garments of her widowhood. Okay, so this is an interesting, part of the story that I was thinking in my head, like, Judah, like, what's wrong with you? Like, what are you doing here? Because, the things that he gave to Tamar, it's like it was a signet, that they used to put on their hands, that they used to sign with. It's like it was a symbol of his authority and power, and his staff that he gave to Tamar was also a symbol of his authority. And mind you, Judah was the leader of the tribe of Judah. He was a leader. So all these things, they signified, his leadership. And to think that he gave them away just like that, I'm like, he must have been in the wrong state of his mind at this point in time, in his life, Judah. So I want us to discuss this point that, Tamar was in possession of these important stuff that belonged to Judah. And she could have exposed him or used them in any other way, really, to shame Judah. But the Bible tells us that, she went away and she was not in the open for 3 months when she became pregnant. So I want us to just discuss this question, like, how do you ladies behave, when you have evidence that can destroy someone, especially the person that has wronged you? So in this case, Tamar was wronged by Judah, and she had all the evidence against Judah. So if you were ever put in a position like that, how would you behave? You have all the files that could destroy somebody's life, especially the person who has hurt you. Okay, Shala.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I was waiting to see another hand go up, but there was no hand. Well, for me, to be honest, I've actually had to work on a vengeful spirit. I like revenge. I hate seeing justice. I love to see when people get their comeuppance, you know what I mean? And anybody who's been in Bible study with me and stuff knows that I've had to actively, how Alicia said the lovely verse, vengeance is mine, safe to look. Oh, Lord, that's nice. Yeah, Jesus take the wheel and that. But I want to see something happen. Do you see what I'm saying? So for me, I would hope and pray that I would say, do you know what, Lord, I can destroy them with this. So I would say if I was being led by the Holy Spirit, then I would do the right thing. If in my own flesh, my vengeance leaning self, I'd probably not take the high road. And that's just me being honest, because when you know that someone's been actively hurting you or deceived you or wronged you, and especially with all that you've been through, it's like, oh, okay, it's my time now. So it's difficult. All I can say is I hope and pray that the Spirit would be leading, the Holy Spirit. That's all I can say.
I think I like that point that, the Holy Spirit really has to be leading in that. And I think that's true. Ellie?
I'm just wondering if that's what Tamar was doing. Was she unleashing evidence on someone? Oh, how do I say this and not sound... Okay, so let's go into Tamar's mind, right? We're not condoning what she did, but there was a method to what she was doing, right? Because if we look at what I don't want to get ahead of your study, but if we look at the punishment for what happened, if she couldn't prove whose pregnancy it was, then she was due to be burned, right? This is why Judah said, bring out to burn her. So she's gone about things in her own way. We have to remember that Tamar was a Canaanite, right? She was not a Hebrew. And we've had studies on Rahab and other people where we've seen that their lives are an example. The things that they've done are an example for us to follow, right? So that's just putting that out there. But I just wonder where we make a difference between when the information is necessary, so you are not dishing it out to shame the person, but it is necessary for a purpose. And the second part of this is that there's some things that we do. It doesn't have to be files of information or photographic evidence. Sometimes it's someone that you don't like, right? You may not like them in your heart, or they've done something to you and you're trying, but someone says something bad about them and you jump on, right? You're like fueling the fire. You use any opportunity to just slip in anything bad about them. It's the same thing. So it comes in levels, if you like. Sometimes it's subtle. But it's never right. I think maybe this way it's never right. I don't think I've released files on anyone, but I am not innocent of, agreeing with someone or, just instilling this kind of idea in somebody else's mind because I'm trying to get back at the person, but indirectly. So out for argument, whether that's what Tamar was doing, but based on the choice she made, what else could she have done? She would have had to just be ready to be burnt, and she wasn't prepared to do that.
Thanks, Ellie, for being honest. Alicia?
If I had evidence against somebody, I would be too scared to release that because I've done so many things that I am probably, I'm not proud of or wouldn't want exposed in that way. And so it just comes down to, treat others how you would like to be treated yourself. Because if the shoe was on the other foot and people would start to say things or, expose me in certain ways, that wouldn't be great. That wouldn't be great for me. And so, yeah, I am, and I would be careful of how I treat other people because I wouldn't want that to be done onto myself. But I think it goes back to what I was saying before in terms of knowing our rights in terms of in certain situations, how can we navigate through situations where we have been wronged. And she knew what the consequences were, that she would potentially be burnt if she didn't have this evidence. And so she did plan this situation and orchestrated, she knew when she could get pregnant. She knew when Judah would be in this place. And she orchestrated all of these events together. And if we just move on to the verse where 26, so Judah acknowledged them, as in his signet and his staff, and said, "She has been more righteous than I, because I did not give her to Selah my son." Right, so she, going back to the Deuteronomy law, she knows that his sons should have been given to her as husbands, but that didn't happen. And so in a roundabout way, justice has been kind of served, although she took it into her own hands. But that's what we see here. And so she would have known Judah's character, and she would have known, okay, he's not actually going to do this thing that he's supposed to. So, yeah, I'm just thinking about the question, what would I do? I wouldn't expose him, but she did what she had to do. I'm not saying that it's justified or she should have done that, but it is, and that's what happened.
That's true. I'll take praise and I'll take Ellie after praise.
I was, what would I do? If I was her, because I think I think it comes as part of being honest. If people had asked her, who's the owner of who's the husband of this pregnancy, or who's caused this pregnancy, should I say. I can't now say I don't have evidence. I think it's part of being dishonest. I think I should, you know, I've got the evidence. I'm not seeing it as evidence. I'm seeing it as a proof of being honest. And, and to be quite honest, I think the reality is when you have all the evidence for somebody, and I think maybe for Tamar, I honestly just think that she went through a lot, and she could have just, you know, said it to all the world that, you know, it's my father-in-law's, but she really didn't. And I am seeing it as if I was her, I would definitely just tell the truth and say that it's my father-in-law. And if you need any more evidence, I might be able to produce some, but I'm not going to lie and just so that I don't expose people. That's what I'm saying.
Oh dear, I like that. Okay, cool. Ellie, and we'll take YouTube.
Can I want to say that I hope that the situation wouldn't be that I'd gotten pregnant by my father-in-law. Okay. It was a different situation, right? And I remember this meme where someone said, whose conversations would you not want to have screenshotted and people to see them? Like, out of your friends, who do you chat to, whose conversation you wouldn't want other people to see? And it seemed funny, but I think nowadays with social media, there's lots of ways that we have more access to information to incriminate other people. Right? I tell you, I've got many conversations. I don't want to take screenshots of my conversations, right? And it's just to be careful as well, because sometimes we may not want to dish the dirt on someone directly. But the fact is that we have information, sometimes it's incriminating evidence about other people that we may not be doing anything with. But the fact that we've got it, causes a problem. But what I wanted to say was this. There's a song, I don't know if I should talk about this song. So it's a song by Ebony. It says, if you break my heart, I'm going to date your father. You know, you are going to be my son. You are going to call me your mother, right? So this is the woman threatening her boyfriend because she's heard that, you know, he's a player, and she's saying, I know about you, but I'm giving you my heart. But I just want you to know that if anything like this happens, if you hurt me, I'm going straight for your dad. Now, it sounds funny, but this is what we do, right? If I don't have my way, you know, I am making myself vulnerable to somebody else. If I cannot control what you're going to do, I'm going to go after something that's precious to you. So of course, if you were to go out with somebody's father, that's just not the way to go. But even people of the world know that, you know, to make that threat is to say this is inappropriate. So if we look at this from Judah's perspective, I think it was big of him to acknowledge. I know that he had no other way because the stuff was his. But if you look at also the law, firstly, he was not supposed to sleep with the prostitute. And he did. He didn't know it was Tamar, but he went for a prostitute. So there should have been punishment for him. He also, according to Mosaic law, was not supposed to sleep with his daughter-in-law. He didn't know it was his daughter-in-law, but he did. He couldn't have married her because that was forbidden as well. But above all, he was not supposed to be dishonest. It was because he was dishonest with her that all of these things happened. So again, not justifying it, but just to bring balance to the discussion, because sometimes we can be so focused on what the person's done wrong, forgetting that there were other things around the story that even if we were in their shoes, we probably wouldn't have done any differently. Maybe we could have acted worse than what Tamar did if this was us.
That's true. Alicia?
Ellie, I'm thinking worse. What does that look like? I don't know how much worse that can get, to be honest. But yeah, I'm just going to read some of the YouTube comments. Ashley wrote, Judah being willing to give away these tokens of his identity and authority for sex, reminds me of the desperation that Esau had to sell his birthright for food, in terms of instant gratification. And yes, we live in a society now where we want things yesterday. Like Amazon Prime, the same day is not good enough. Like, I needed my stuff yesterday. Where is it? Amari writes, just on a side note, you wonder why Jacob didn't recognize Leah on the wedding night. It may be the same reason why Judah didn't recognize Tamar. Both involve veils. Just speculating here. Just speculating. So yeah, so guys, girls, when you get married, make sure, you know, the veil is lifted before you say the I do's. Just saying. And Amari writes, sorry, Jody, Judah lost 2 sons and his wife. His wrongs aside for just 1 second, the story shows us how if we don't seek God first, our feelings can lead us to take some wild turns and have to face those consequences. Thank you. Amari writes, how did Tamar even know that her plan would work? Well, that would be telling. I mean, women know a lot of things, right? Women's intuition, women.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah.
Obviously. What does that say about Judah? And did Tamar turn down everyone else while waiting for Judah? I have so many questions. In brackets, no need to answer them. But perhaps we can answer some of them in the after hours, which is to follow the study.
Yeah.
Isaac writes, broken people break other people. Yes.
Yes. Well, I think, right. I think let's just discuss this one more point on Judas' hypocrisy. So, you know, like Judah then heard that, you know, Tamar, her daughter-in-law, his daughter-in-law, sorry, was pregnant. And it was like, you know, bring her and we're going to burn her, you know. So this represents, you know, the level of hypocrisy that, you know, Judah had. And I just wanted us maybe to explore just a little bit, you know, this level of hypocrisy, especially, you know, the power imbalance that comes, especially with those in, you know, in high authority, you know, let's say in the church context, like leadership in the church, there is power imbalance there, you know, of people who take advantage of, you know, other people. Like in this case, Judah was the leader of the tribe of, you know, of Judah, and he thought that he could, you know, he could just burn Tamar and, you know, his own sins would be buried. And, you know, so I just want us to just explore that for a little bit, and then, I mean, we can move on towards the end of our study, Shala.
Yeah, that's a good question, Kizzy. So I was thinking with regards to Judah, when you look at like verse 21, you know how he says like, where is the harlot that was openly by the wayside? I was thinking, was there an aspect of shame? Like usually if someone has shame and they go into a red light district, I don't know, I'm assuming they've got a hoodie on, they've got glasses on. Oh gosh, I don't want anyone to see me. Do you see what I'm saying? But he's just, oh, where's the prostitute? That was it. Like, you know, where's the bus stop? You see what I'm saying? Where can I catch the 133 at Streatham? Like, to me, there seems no shame. And the reason why I say that is because, well, taking it to our time, sometimes we can normalize our sin. You know, like the Bible speaks about searing your conscience with a hot iron. So when you're sinning and sinning and sinning and everyone around you, and it's like, oh, I'm struggling. Sometimes we're not struggling. Sometimes we just have to admit that we like what we like and we don't want to give it up. And then what you do by default, you kind of like normalize the sin and it doesn't seem so bad. So that's what allows us to say, they're doing that, burn them. Do you see what I'm saying? That's what allows you to feel so big and bold, because you forget what your sin is. Or it's like, for example, growing up in Caribbean Christianity, if we speak about homosexuality, it's like, oh, Adam and Steve, bun you, how could they do that? Whereas the same person saying bun Adam and Steve probably has his wife, 2 side gal, another one, do you see what I'm saying? So it's like, once we normalize stuff and it doesn't burn us as much that we're doing it, it's easy for us to judge others and say, whoa, look at you, what you're doing is so bad. But once you look at Christ, then you remember how dirty you are. So I think he definitely took his eyes off Christ, what we can clearly see. And then after everything came down to it, he was kind of like, you know, he had that moment of rebuke, like, do you know what? Yeah, I've done her kind of dirty still. She's been more righteous than me. Obviously, in her whole actions, it's not so much that she was righteous, because we see her actions weren't that pure. But I guess he had a moment of, well, if I look at myself, and that's what happens to all of us, isn't it? We come to Bible study, we come to the feet of Jesus. You know, we're looking at Tamar and we're looking at all these women in the Bible. Oh, how could they do that? And then the Holy Spirit shows you, but what about you though? Because this is what you did last night, and this is what you did 10 years ago, and this is, do you see what I'm saying? And you're like, oh, okay, I guess I should come off my pedestal then. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Wow, powerful. I like that. Ellie?
So the question is the question what we think about Judas' hypocrisy? Was that the question?
Yes, and just join it to power imbalance, especially with those in authority.
I think that the hypocrisy point, I don't know if I'll get the power imbalance bit, but on the hypocrisy point, I mean, that's me, right? Maybe that's most of us, that we, like what Charlotte was saying, do not see what we are doing. And part of it is because we have, I don't know, especially in the church, we seem to have levels of sin. I have to be careful, because God also looks at sin the same way we see it in how people will be punished at the end of the world and how God's going to do that. But I'm not going to go there. But we are very forgetful, right, of what we do. And especially when someone does something wrong and when it's public, the first thing is not for you to look at yourself. I'm learning, and it's a hard road. I'm learning now that if I hear something about someone, especially when someone offends me, I shouldn't deny how I feel about it. But the next thing I do is try and look at it from their perspective, because you begin to see, once you stop and do that, you begin to see why they did it without justifying it, and realizing that I probably could have done the same thing as well. But for Judah could have released Tamar from the time on and died. When he realized that his youngest son was too young, at that point, he could have said, you know, according to the law as well, he could have said that, my son is too young. It's too long for you to wait for him. He didn't do that. It meant that Tamar could not marry anyone else because she wasn't released by the father-in-law. So you see now, when we get to this point where all his stuff is exposed and the way that he responds, it's almost as if all these things that he has done, he doesn't see them through the eyes of his own actions. He is self-preserving. So when he thinks that and Onan have died because of Tamar, maybe at this point, he actually doesn't have the information that it wasn't Tamar. We look at the story now, in hindsight, because we've got the full story. But as a father who is living this experience, and then his wife dies, Sheila is the only person that he has, that is in his family, if you like. And he doesn't know why the other two sons have died. So it looks like his consideration at this point, when all of these things are exposed, goes far beyond what's just happened. And I think it's a blessing that even when it's us and we are judging other people for being hypocritical, God can help us not to be that way. But when we are brought back to our senses, we can look back as far as we can and realize what we've done and make amends. Because sometimes we've done things that are wrong. We're still pointing the finger, but we're not rectifying the situation. And for Judah, I give him props for that. He did the honorable thing once the sin was pointed out.
Yeah. I think the Bible gives another example of, Mary Magdalene. I think, Jesus was talking to the scribes and Pharisees. They wanted to stone her, and he said, if anyone is without sin, let him pick up the stone and throw. And they all disappeared. And I think there's also another text, I believe it's Luke 6, that, Christ is saying, before you take the speck out of your brother's eye, you need to pick up the log out of, your own eye. So, I think it's very important that we exercise the same scrutiny that we would want for ourselves, because we tend to be too hard on other people and more lenient on ourselves, and think that I can do this, but the other person can't do the same thing. Like, I'm allowed to, but the other person is not allowed to do the same thing. I want us to move on. Sorry, time is killing us, and I hope that we can we can have a discussion in the after hours. But it's been like a dramatic story that we've been dealing with. Lots of pain, so many things happening in this story. But we just want to hear like the end of the story, like what happened at the end. I'm just gonna just give a summary of the last few verses of Genesis 38, that Tamar then gave birth to two children. Both of them were sons. That was Pharez and Zara. Okay, so we've got the text on the screen. I'll just read it quickly. It says, "Now it came to pass at the time for giving birth that, behold, twins were in her womb. And so it was when she was giving birth that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took a scarlet thread and bound it on his hand, saying, this one came first. Then it happened as he drew back his hand that his brother came out unexpectedly, and she said, how did you break through? This breach be upon you. Therefore his name was called Perez. Afterward, his brother came out who had the scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zara." Can we just also have the text in Matthew chapter 1? Right, so this is like the genealogy of Jesus. In Matthew chapter 1, it says Judah begot Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Such an amazing. So she becomes one of the first women, being mentioned in the genealogy of Christ. I mean, I would have thought that if God was to bring Christ, maybe, he would have come through the line of Joseph because of all the things that, we know about Joseph. But God uses a woman like Tamar, a sinless God using a sinful woman, a perfect God using an imperfect woman to bring Christ. So we see really, the amazing grace of God, and how he sees situations. If we were to do this ourselves, I think we would have chosen Christ to come differently, not from, Tamar. And we've got so many stories that we've discussed. We've got Leah's story. We have the story of Rahab. All these women were women who were imperfect that God used for greater purposes. And I believe that it's the same for us as women, that, whatever the situation that maybe, you found yourself in, you've been disadvantaged, you've been, taken advantage of by, you've been wronged, you've been hurt. God is able to, to use your situation in a way that you never expected. I don't know if we just got one person. I know, Praise, you had your hand on. I don't know if you want to just say something quickly before we conclude.
Yeah, it just came to my mind when Ellie was talking, and the story of Ruth. I'll just read it here. Ruth chapter 1, verse 12. It says, "Turn again, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have an husband. If I should say I have hope, if I should have an husband also tonight, and should also bear sons, would you tarry for them till they were grown? Would you stay for them? Would you stay for them from having husbands? Nay, my daughters, for it grieveth me much for your sakes, that the hand of the Lord is gone out against me." I was just thinking about it when Ellie was talking, in that the contrast between what Ruth did with what Judah did. Ruth, when the husbands died, he said, even if I was to have a husband today and have children, it will grieve me to see you wait for these children to grow up whilst you're just waiting. Whereas Judah, quite a very selfish in a sense that he was okay for her to wait because this the last born was very young. He wanted her to wait. Such a very clear contrast of how I think godly people should act, or at least in-laws, in relation to their daughter-in-laws.
Powerful. Yes, I think we're gonna love our viewers and leave them for tonight, but we don't end here. We're going to continue in the after hours study. I think we're going to put the details on the screen, but also they will be in the chat. So you're welcome to join us in about, I'd say 5 to 10 minutes. So join us in the after hours. Come with the questions and we will discuss them. But also next week, we are back again with one of our last studies, actually, and we're going to be looking at Potiphar's wife. That will be an interesting one. But before we leave, we'll just have a closing prayer, and yes, we'll meet in the after hours. If Shala, if you could pray for us, please.
Okay, let us pray. Lord, thank you so much for this study, everything that we've discussed. Thank you for just reminding us, Lord, how important it is to have patience, the spirit of discernment, just to be led by you. Lord, you know it's easier said than done, but we know with Christ we can do all things. So I pray specifically, Lord, that you'll help us to trust you, to trust your timing, and that you'll help us to remove more distractions from our lives so that we can hear your voice more clearly. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Amen. Okay, thank you everyone and have a good evening.
And bye-bye.